the topic here is basically the global aspects of investments and biotech. And in particular, it's weirdly well suited to me because I am, despite my heavy Glaswegian accent, I'm actually from the US originally. I've been here 5 years, so I've started to understand a little bit about the UK. So actually I'll be taking notes as well, everybody. The US continues to be the global powerhouse, I guess, along with China, in terms of investment. So to put numbers to this, in terms of VC funding, the US in 2024, $23.5 billion in direct investment. The UK, $3.5 billion. And most of that was follow-on, actually primarily from US funding. So there really is quite a disparity between the two. And I think one of the reasons that we are here is to begin to continue to address this disparity. But some of that is also because they have very different end goals. So the US, I think, is pretty clear what their end goal is. It's not just to improve health, but also build a biotech economy. And of course, everybody has that as a goal, but that's their focus. The focus here is to bring innovation in healthcare, but make sure that it's attached to a good cost structure and that it directly impacts health in a much more direct way. And I think what the UK is trying to do is to sort of carve out this path where they can get both public benefit and still remain globally competitive. That's an interesting needle to thread. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So we'll unpack some of these differences and some of the similarities, the structural differences, and of course, lessons learned. Before I get into that, so I guess starting with you, Pari, can you introduce yourself and one thing that you are hoping to bring out here that I might not ask?
Yes. So, hello everyone. So my name is Adam Ray. So, what was your question? One thing that you may not ask?
You're doing great, Pari.
I'm Adam. But
just one thing you're hoping that to tell us today.
Okay, so my role is kind of very much, I live my life as a regulatory consultant for my sins and a past life, it seems. So I'm hoping to try and give an insight into kind of what I see going on across the globe, where the UK is trying to position itself relative to what's going on in the EU. Very recently, the UK has kind of been trying to align with that, but the EU is kind of changing as well and trying to give an understanding of what FDA do versus EU versus UK and where I think the UK is going.
Cool. How about you, Keith?
I'm Katriona Brooksbank. So as Jesse mentioned earlier, I'm the head of innovation for the West of Scotland, but hosted here in GGC. So we sit as part of R&I, as part of the sponsor organisation. And I suppose if there was one particular take home I would want people to think about is come and speak to the NHS as early as possible. We can't do everything for you in terms of supporting innovation sort of cradle to grave. It definitely needs that triple helix approach. But actually, if you want to understand what data we have, how you can access it, the sort of test bed services that we have in order to evidence generate, because really we have an NHS that treats everybody exactly the same at the point of access, and that's unique. That means our data set's unique, and we store that data longitudinally. So we have this massive repository that Chris was talking about, Tile Bio, have already benefited from. But I think people are just a bit nervous about asking about how they can access and use it for innovation. We can't solve all the problems on our own. We need commercial collaborators and academic partners to develop those solutions that we need back into the service. And also, we really like bringing it back into the NHS, but we might not be your only customer, and we completely understand that. So we'll try and work with you on a plan for implementation.
Yeah, I think you've already brought out some of the differences. This will be a different conversation in the US, and I'll get back to those points. How about you, Derek?
Hi. I'm Derek Gilchrist. I'm CSO and co-founder of Causeway Therapeutics. So we're developing therapies for the treatment of tendinopathy. We're also spun out of the University of Glasgow with just an idea. And thanks to the wonderful support of Scottish Enterprise, got to shout you out there, Nicola. So we've went from just literally an idea all the way through to sort of clinical proof of concept and a successful phase 2. And in terms of the subject of this one is one of the things that we've realised over the course of the last probably 12 months is that our molecule, selectivity, Although it's like, you know, it's for tending, and it'll affect most people in this, like, you know, audience at some point during their life, will almost certainly so not find its primary market in the UK. NHS is not where this is going to sit. All of our sort of decisions strategically are based on the US market, which is sad, but it's just an inevitable truth in terms of funding.
This is I gave the numbers. This is the reality.
Yeah, it's just a reality.
A little bit more. How about you?
Hello, my name is Pari Datta. I'm Head of Technology Strategy in Health Technology at CPI. CPI is one of the government's catapult centres, so effectively we're a national innovation centre with 600 plus scientists and engineers and $300 million worth of equipment and assets. And we're there to help companies develop their products or technologies, almost provide the scientists and engineering and manufacturing expertise to take your product to the market, develop the technologies and the science, etc. So that's kind of my role at the moment. I serve that centre in terms of providing strategic direction in health tech, but also developing some of our national initiatives, which I'm working with several of you in this room on. But my other hat is I've spent 20 years as a strategy consultant for various different organizations, trying to bring innovations into medical technology. And in that journey, I've worked mostly in the US, which actually does tell you something, doesn't it? With some of the larger companies who sometimes struggle to innovate. What I would like to see from today is a bit of optimism, because we always, in these forums, we always have our eye on the challenges, but actually I want there to be a sense of hope in getting something into the NHS, and the fact that the NHS can actually be a force multiplier for global adoption, and that's kind of what I would like to see today.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I should say I'm Ross Cagan. I'm a professor here and also have started 4 companies, 2 of which are going, both in the US and here, so I have a bit of an understanding of the 2 of them. And actually, Pari, I'm going to stay with you and then sweep back across, because for my first question, we and you have talked about the structural differences between the UK and the US. So I'm a young bio-entrepreneur. I've got this company going. I've got to make decisions about whether I want to push it to the US or whether I want to keep it here in the UK, whether I want to work with Katriona. What are some of the actual structural differences that I need to think about, and how do I pitch it differently if I'm going to the US versus if I'm coming over here to Katriona?
I mean, it's a very different pitch, essentially. Sometimes the sort of the skeletal elements are the same, but the pitch is quite different. I mean, if we get back to the sort of center of the argument, the US, in terms of medical devices, is above now 50% of the global market. We are but 2.5% of the market. There is one element of DNA which it's completely makes our systems different, and the US is market-driven, right? You have to get your code, then you have to get adoption by the different payers and the insurers, and then you have to be commercially appealing to the hospitals, because they effectively want to sell, quotation marks, their product to the end users. It's a very different model, whereas here in the UK, we're about value, about evidence, and evidence drives adoption. And there isn't that sort of commercial pull. There's one buyer that makes 80 to 85%. It's complicated buyer, as you guys know in this room, but that's the essence of it. So it's market-driven in the US, and that's fundamentally very different. You have to be commercially appealing. But at the end of the day, the pot of money is much greater, which is the pull. And I think one of the things I've seen in 20 years of helping some of the larger companies in M&A, et cetera, and innovation, is that it used to be the case that we target EU first because it was easier in terms of regulation. We'd get more money in the US, but it's flipped now. It's actually easier to get FDA approval. And so I think that's that sort of difference of that market pull is that, commercial angle is the most important differentiator between the 2 systems.
What do you think, Derek, as CSO of Causeway? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. The understanding is that the market access part of the US is really important, because it's not something we even think about. So in terms of the NHS, it's like you've got one provider, you talk to NICE, it's like, if they buy into your sort of health economic argument, you've got an approved drug, it's like there will be uptake. But there it's like it's literally it's a jigsaw puzzle of payers that you've got to actually speak to, understand sort of what their needs are. And it's some of it is accountancy, it seems. It's like you've got to essentially, they don't want to be paying for a surgical procedure. So this year, they want to be pushed off to next year because they understand that, the people with insurance tend to jump between policies every year and a half. And it's like, it just doesn't seem like, so it's a very, very different, place to do it. But when you look at the cost of your drug that you're going to sell there, it's like for a single injection of our molecule, there's like 15 grand per injection. And that's what they're happy to do that. You can't imagine the NHS ever being happy with 15k for something that is essentially an inconvenience injury, and rather than something that's going to affect your quality, affect your sort of lifespan. So yeah, it's completely different. But the sad thing is like, as I said before, no one cares about the NHS. No one cares about the UK. They barely care about the EU. And certainly so the US investors, it's like, that's all they're interested in.
You going to take that?
I was going to say, could I come in there? I do think that the landscape is changing in the NHS. And I know I work in the NHS, so I'm going to be biased in that slightly. But I did move back from the university into the NHS because I thought it was some of the work that we were doing in Scotland academically and commercially in collaborations was amazing and impactful. But why were we not advocating it for ourselves and for our families and for our health service that we're really proud of, because we do treat everybody exactly the same when they come and access their care.
Yeah.
Now, the difficulty is the way that sort of financial structures are within the NHS, and I understand that procurement and sort of pathways to adoption have been massively challenging, but I think that is changing. There is an absolute desire, and every First Minister, Prime Minister, Chief Scientist, policy document that comes out is saying that we have to shift the balance of our treatment. And we're not just thinking about providing a sort of treatment once the worst has happened at the end of a healthcare journey. We're thinking about preventative. So to your example about £15,000 that might be an inconvenience, we're now trying to evidence and think about the economic impact of an individual not being able to work. It might not be a life or death clinical situation, but we're actually building business cases for implementation and adoption around what is the wider societal impact of somebody not being able to be treated for something that is relatively minor on a clinical scale, but is actually massively impactful to their life, to their, prescription use of medication, to their work, to their ability to look after themselves and their families. It is not going to happen fast because this is the UK and it is public sector funded, but it is absolutely changing. The difference that needs to happen is that focus on evidence generation so that we can bring our workforce with us, trust in our patients who worry about technology, but we have to spend a lot of time engaging to say that we're only going to do things that are safe and effective. We are looking to reduce health inequalities, and we need to fund it from a separate pot than going to the service providers who can't pay their locum bills that month, saying, by the way, if you pay for this innovation, we'll find loads more patients you have to treat, but it's going to be better in 15 years. So all of those discussions are happening just now. I'm a believer, but, I do work in the NHS, so...
Yeah. And I just want to add very quickly, we'll get back to you, Derek, but I just want to add very quickly that, of course, in the US, that thinking is lots of money goes in, but that supports a biotech environment. So it's a different approach. I do think that there's starting to be pushback on that now, and driving the cost down is starting to gain traction. So maybe the future is, that's when I said the UK is trying to find a novel path. Right now, that path doesn't look so amazing, but actually the future, you could argue, belongs to that path.
Yep.
Because Americans are, I can tell you, I'm not loving how much they're paying now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think since Brexit with the UK and the EU, that really changed from just, again, very regulatory perspective. The landscape really changed, and I find myself now recommending UK FDA route first as opposed to EU, because the requirements for a lot of medical device manufacturers can be so high under the EU regulations.
Sorry, UK and then US, or UK or US?
UK or US, depending on where they think, where do you think you can go? What's the most appropriate route for you at that time? From my perspective, my focus is on, does this device work? Is it effective? The money side of things is important, but I leave that for other people to deal with. I care about, does it work for the patient at the time?
Sure.
So yeah, I've really noticed myself changing the recommendations from that regulatory strategy perspective to say, okay, you could use UK, use that market access to leverage verification, simplified access routes into, say, Malaysia across the globe, and America as well, having lots of kind of verification and reliance for other countries as well. So trying to be efficient in the way when you get market access, how you can piggyback off that to other countries, basically. I think the UK at the moment is in a fortunate position because they've not done anything too harsh with the regulatory perspective. We've kind of watched what's happening in the EU and watched what's happening in America, and I think they're kind of posed to be able to make some good decisions on what needs to happen next.
Sure.
I'm going to actually start with you guys in the because regulatory has come up here, and in the previous session, I'm going to actually start. I have a question on that and then come across, and then we'll get back to the investment side of it. And that is, a while back, a colleague of mine said the difference who came out of Facebook and then entered the healthcare system. And they asked him what the difference was. And he said the difference was in Facebook, you would put out software as a beta, and people would try, it didn't work very well, and they would come back and give suggestions, and then you would play with it. And he said, you can't do that in healthcare. There's no beta, right? You have to go with something that doesn't harm people. So how do you thread the needle? So one of the challenges is that NHS actually has to make sure that things, as you just said, work for people, make financial sense, but also healthcare sense. And that's in tension with something that may be a little bit more risky that a company would push forward, that is basically there is the dichotomy between you don't want a healthcare system that embraces risk, but at the same time we're talking about embracing risk. So how do you thread that needle?
So, and from the medical device design perspective, we have ISO 14971, which is benefit risk profile. So for any medical device, there has to be a clinical benefit. If not, it's not a medical device. So in the entire device development from, I would say no intended use, no medical device, no user needs, no medical device. So from the time that those two things are defined, then we should really be thinking about that risk benefit profile. Obviously it should be favorable towards the benefit and not the risk. And that is ultimately how we try to substantiate that from a technical documentation perspective when you're submitting it through regulatory authorities. So the word novel is something that all kind of startups I would be saying be very careful about using the word novel, because it will just attract so much regulatory heat. So just do not use that word unless it's really, really novel.
But does that mindset make it more challenging? This is, I think, where we keep landing is on this very point. What do you think, Katriona?
Well, I mean, from a regulatory perspective, absolutely. But we think about the risk, benefit, and the ethics of that for the patients. And the idea of sort of research ethics is that we are advocating for protecting patients' rights and dignity, but they also have the right to have access to the best care and innovation. And we need people to come with us in order to test out any of our innovations. Now, we make a risk assessment and we think about the risk all the way through, but the answer can't be no, we're not going to innovate, because that just might change something. And we do have some people in our organisations who would prefer it if we just didn't do anything. And that's why the ecosystem we've got in Scotland, and particularly in Glasgow, is so sort of useful and helpful, because we think about it from a regulatory perspective, from an ethical perspective involving patients and caregivers, but also thinking from us in the NHS, from an information governance and an information security, which can feel like the death of most data-driven technologies, but it actually shouldn't be. It's just that we need to control the narrative and advise people of the safe approach to doing this. So the answer can't be that we take no risk, but what we have to do is articulate to patients and our workforce and our innovators what the appropriate steps, checks and balances and options are. Maybe it's looking at retrospective data to see if something works. Maybe it's running something in a shadow mode so it doesn't impact on clinical care. Or maybe it's generating an appropriately designed clinical investigation of a medical device. All of those are options that we should be exploring, because not doing anything is the biggest risk.
So now I'm going to turn, I guess, to the corporate side. So this is a discussion about the impact on patients and so on, but this has not been a discussion on the building of companies and biotech economics. So what do you think in terms of this?
Well, I think risk is at the forefront. If you're doing drug development, risk is like the number one question you have to actually answer. When you start taking a novel molecule, putting it into a patient, you need to demonstrate safety before anything else. So that's pretty much the structure of all effort, regulatory and development efforts. So what was the question again?
The question is that there is a tension between, as you described, starting biotech companies and making sure that they provide benefit to the patient, but the emphasis you can put on the building of a biotech economy, or you can put it on making sure that the NHS has cost-effective treatments. Those can be in tension. So that's my question.
Yeah.
Where do you land?
essentially it's like, you know, one of the great things about sort of Scotland and the UK and the NHS is it's a wonderful place to actually is like, you know, to develop and test you know, drugs. There's financial support. There's like clinical support. You can interact with the NHS. It's like patients are at your doorstep. You can go over, you know, across the road and you can actually speak to someone who's actually potentially going to be using your drug for the treatment of patients. And it's also incredibly, you know, efficient in terms of how much it costs. So, you know, we went from an idea all the way through to, you know, a drug that we, you know, completed a phase 2, demonstrated that it worked, demonstrated that it was safe. It's like, and it cost us about $20 million. $20 million, which is actually just peanuts. So the equivalent, so, you know, effort in the US would cost about, you know, potentially half a billion to do that. I mean, no companies actually tried several times to do it, and that's how much it cost them. So when we actually, you know, speak to investors, it's like they look like, you know, there is value here, but it's almost like they go, how can you do it? There must be an issue with it if you manage to do it for that cheap. You know, so for that, I mean, you know, no cost, no corners were ever cut. But the thing is, it's like we need to like be probably, you know, articulating that message better to them to say that it's like the real value is here. But I guess it's like, you know, ultimately the pull is to go back to the States because that's where the money is. You know, and we find it very difficult raising money beyond that because, you know, you go to like US investors, that's where the ones with deep pockets, they understand it. But they go like, well, we only do it in the West Coast or we only do it in the Boston area because there's so many opportunities there that they don't need to actually think about, so that, you know, like going beyond that. You know, the US is a massive gravity well for funding. It really is.
Sure. It reminds me of there was many years ago an interview of a bank robber, and they asked Willie Sutton why he robbed banks, and he said because that's where they keep the money. So it's like that. What do you think, Pari?
Well, I mean, I think to build on your point, I think the UK and Scotland are a remarkable place to develop your product. It's cost effective. But going back to the NHS, I mean, I speak to some of the world's largest companies in medical devices regularly, right? It's part of my job. And one thing that always strikes me is that we start talking about the potential, the market in the UK, they switch off. It's very sad to hear that, but, you know, 20 times more value in the US, going back to the reimbursement codes, much more, say, diagnostics, much more money per test, cost per test. But when you start talking to them about developing it, proving it out in the NHS, they absolutely love that. Because once you have a positive, nice recommendation and you have a validation NHS, that they can take to payers and insurers in the US, and that really gives them that badge of honor. So I think that's something really there. I mean, it's quite hard. And if you think back to the 80s and 90s, we always used to think of ourselves as one of the world's leading economies. We are still, and so in the bracket of the top 3. And we have to kind of get out of that mindset a little bit. We are, you know, a relatively small market, but we're a great place to develop, show that your product works, generate value for patients, and then help the rest of the world grow the markets, essentially, for these devices across the global economies.
Can you give a specific example of a path that would be cheaper here than elsewhere?
I just think, like, going back to your point, the actual clinical trials, the pilots, much more cost effective here than in the US. If you think of it from the sort of brutal truth of salaries and infrastructure, it's way cheaper. And some of the startups I've been working with in the West Coast are interested in doing that kind of work in the NHS for that reason. I think the figures were like 2 or 3 times less. Brutal truth, salaries, for example, clinicians get paid a lot more there than they do here. Also resource infrastructure, and also the fact that everything's in one place. There's something really valuable in that. So the disparate nature of all the things you need to connect to work in the US makes this, especially Scotland, actually very attractive, and I think it's something we need to hone on. So don't think about the NHS as a place where you're going to make billions and become a huge company. Use the NHS as a place where you're going to really demonstrate value, do something great for our economy and our healthcare and our patients. Use it as a place to build your business effectively.
So one of the key things for, you know, investor, I guess, is like looking at the team and saying like, you have got a track record of delivering success. And to be honest, there's like, there isn't that here yet. I think we're building it. I think there's like, you know, with this, like, the more success stories you hear, people will be continue to be based here. But we can't just like, you know, pick up the phone and just like, you know, get somebody who's done it in 2-3 years, taken a company from concept all the way through to IPO, delivered return for the investors. It's like that. Just those people aren't here.
No.
They aren't here yet. You know, and I think that this is why, Causeway as an example, we've had to recruit a US-based team now. So the Causeway is actually going to move from being a Glasgow-focused company to a sort of Boston area-focused company within the next 6 months.
And that's a very typical story. And I think that goes back to an infrastructure point as well. So if you look at somewhere like Boston, the West Coast, you've got people who've done it so many times before. And actually, if you think about that, it comes from the investment and the large companies that are there as well.
Yeah.
We've got a long-term thing to do in the UK where we sort of create a culture and a sort of a cadre of people who've done it before, not at an SME scale, but actually scale to that global size. And I think that's kind of going back to more of a government. How do we attract inward investment? How do we, almost like the Irish model, right? They're showing a lot of success with their SMEs right now.
Yeah.
That's a 10 to 15 year journey they've been on. They attracted lots of investment. They made Ireland a great place to develop your medical device. I know now investors actually want to do their work in Ireland, right?
Yeah, we get no idea how depressing it is. It's like we've got a board member who sat there and goes, we're trying to raise X amount of money. It's like, $150 million in order to actually take us all the way through. And we get clear line of sight to an approved drug. It's like, in a $1 billion market, everything else. And he was going, why are you finding it so difficult to raise money? And it's just like, I've got a company, I sit on a board of a company that is preclinical and they've just raised like 300 million. So you go, but these are West Coast problems.
What do you think, guys?
Well, I guess first off, Pari, Jesse and I have never had anybody tell us it's too cheap to do research in Glasgow. So I'm going to record that clip and play that the next time I get pushback on the cost that we try and do. And it's interesting to hear about the sort of ecosystem and you talking about Ireland. I mean, again, back to the sort of national innovation landscape that is a real triple helix journey in Scotland. I guess we're probably about 10 years behind that. But actually, government organisations, NHS organisations and academic organisations are really trying to recognise that. The focus is that it's not about individuals, it's about multidisciplinary teams. Scotland is a relatively small country, but there's lots of expertise. It's about connecting the dots to the right people speaking to each other and also recognising that we can evidence generate here really well if we're able to implement innovation, great for real world evidence, which is so important for commercial collaborators because we will always challenge the use and the ongoing use of those technologies. And we can do that in a system-wide approach, not in the fractured nature. So one of the points you said as a benefit in Scotland, our Chi number links all of the healthcare interactions. We're not trying to piece the data together. It already comes as a package once we deploy that. And I think we just have to make sure that we are as supportive and not precious about the spaces that we each exist in, but it has to be back to that multidisciplinary team, try and recognise where there are areas of expertise, link people together and mentor and support as much as possible for us in the sort of clinical innovation space, clinical innovators and academics who want to be able to do that, starting out all the way through to big companies that we're using their products who want real world evidence.
I think before I get to you, could you say very brief, because I think this is very instructive, briefly describe what's happening in Ireland? Because I think they're an interesting model for us, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, at a top level, Ireland 20 years ago, can't remember the exact dates, but made that clear. We will make Ireland a great place to develop your medical device. We will attract Pfizer's, Medtronics, etc. And that's been a 20-year journey. And obviously what happens is once you have companies like Pfizer and Medtronic and huge sort of national investment from companies like that, they build infrastructure, they train the people.
Right.
So then you have people who've been developing medical devices, taking things to market successfully for 15 to 20 years. Those people can spin off and leave that corporate ecosystem and then enter into the SME environment. And I speak to so many wonderful people who've been in that journey. And that's why you now have this sort of potential with companies staffed by people who actually have had those success stories. And it's almost replicating the West Coast model in a kind of a smaller scale. But I think that's the kind of journey we need to make. And we have to remember that the system is driven by external investment and big global companies investing in us. And that's kind of where we need to get to. I know there's been quite a few difficult stories in the press recently about external investment into the into the UK, and I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, seeing the wonderful things the government is doing, a bit biased here, I guess, but we will see some great traction in that space.
Yeah, that's hopefully that narrative changes for those who haven't paid attention. So it sounds like and then we'll get over here. So in Ireland, first, it was a political decision. I think we can agree, and that obviously has to be done. And then the second thing is that as somebody in the previous panel brought this up, that you need to have one person making the decision that then cuts across the country. You can't have like a series of small decisions. It's just not practical to break that up. And I think that second one may be a challenge, but probably is going to happen. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think from the kind of looking at what the UK is doing again, I think the UK right now is a very good place to be building a medical device business. Like, we have a very flexible and risk-based competent authority with the MHRA, who I think are doing a brilliant job at the moment in navigating I think if we kind of niche into specifically on AI kind of based medical devices. In the US, the first one was approved in 1995, and up until 2015, there was only under 20. And then since 2015 now, there's over 1,200. So in eight years, about over 80% of the AI devices have went on the US market. The MHRA at the moment is really trying to position the UK to be able to place these devices in the market with benefit, not have borderline devices creeping into clinical decision support tools or non-devices or just these kind of weird spaces that they end up in. I think that is the benefit of the UK, is we have a relatively small competent authority. The resource isn't big. It's really not big. But they are pragmatic and they're looking at what's going on elsewhere. The AI airlock results have just been released as well, which had the 4 companies there, which they kind of looked at various things, explainability, predictability, as well as how post-market surveillance will be managed for devices based on AI. And the results of that are really interesting, what is produced, and that will inform what the MHRA will legislate going forward, which is ultimately at the moment there's probably not going to be any legislative changes with the way AI devices are treated in the UK, but they will supplement guidance with it, aligned with what the US is doing. So it doesn't look like the UK is going to go down the route of enacting the AI Act, which is what the EU has, which is kind of causing a bit of havoc. There's no one there to designate to approve AI-based devices at the moment, but it's coming into force in 2 years, or being applied in 2 years, or next year. So that's a bit of an interesting predicament, I think, what's going on. So I think in the UK at the moment, I do think there is a space there for these spin-outs of universities, these kind of software-based companies, because we don't have a lot of manufacturing here. In the UK, it's not a thing. So software is the way that we are moving as a society, and I think that's where the MHRA recognises that, and they're trying to have good innovative device pathways, AI airlocks to enable and foster AI-based devices, software devices to have easy routes onto market, and then linking with the digital health labs and to generate that evidence, So I'm looking at what our competent authority is doing at the moment, and they're ultimately the gateway to getting these devices on the market.
And then in response to that, the NHS is building infrastructure to be able to think about the governance, the security and the ongoing monitoring of those tools and the engagement with patients and the workforce, because it is still in the sort of medical space, AI is still a bit of a scary word for people who aren't working in that, and our patients think that it's going to replace seeing a clinician, or that some autonomous decision making is going to happen and there won't actually be anyone checking it, and our workforce think that they might be out of a job. And actually, that's not the way that we're planning to implement. We're planning to implement it to be able to use that scale, the data we hold on people, to better inform decision making, so the right patients access the right treatment in the right setting for them. That reduces the burden on our front doors and it improves accessibility for the patients who need it.
Yeah, so interesting, the two sides and the difference in emphasis. So let's throw it back over here and that emphasis. Why this? And then I'll add a more specific question, but this is a broader one, just riffing off of what I see as these differences. Why is it important for the UK to have a biomedical economy versus just saying, let the US figure all this out and then we'll figure out what works for the NHS?
From a UK perspective, I mean, we're not in a great place economically, full stop. And there are a number of things that we're very good at. And actually, life science innovation, the seeding ideas, we're actually fantastic at. So the potential there for us to develop our economy here, based on life sciences and biomedical innovations, is huge. I had a look at the number of SMEs in the medtech space. In this country, it's immense. In Scotland, it's very strong on that. So there's a potential to develop a great economy based on a number of sectors in the UK, and life sciences and medical devices is one. So I think that's why there's very few markets or industries that we can say that can be that. So that's a very positive message. But on the flip side, we haven't really built big companies, nor have we attracted other companies to invest in the UK. So the potential is there, and there are very few industries that can give us that potential. And I just hope we can find a way of unlocking that, because we could be one of the world's leading economies when it comes to the biomedical space.
Do you agree?
100%. One of the things that I haven't heard from this, I don't want to use the very right, but money is important. Money is important. So essentially it's like you're talking about billion-dollar companies that will be, from each idea could potentially be a billion-dollar company. And that should be our aspiration. Yeah. And in terms of the talent here academically, so, and I don't really want to mention about the triple helix and all that kind of thing. This is a great ecosystem for doing it. But what we need is more of it. We need to have, a track record of generating that. We're great at coming up with ideas. We're great at getting it to a certain point. And at that point there, it doesn't scale particularly well. The UK specifically, and Scotland specifically are really good for economic purposes. So one of the things when we speak to investors in the US and stuff is we go, okay, we're just going to move the whole country, the whole company there, and just be a US based company. And then it's they actually look into the details of it and they go, well, you've got a patent box. In terms of tax, it's you've got R&D tax credits. Mm-hmm. And they don't have anything like that in the US that I'm aware of. And they're well, this is incredible. So, okay, we'll create a presence in the US, but we'll still keep the company as being a UK Scotland company. So there is value there. But we need momentum. We need momentum from companies like Causeway, the companies that you're talking about, in terms of actually going, this is a great place. Investors sometimes don't make the trip up north. It's because there's so many opportunities down in Oxford, Cambridge, Warrington, Manchester, and they come up here and it's a bit of an afterthought. We're a bit of a backwater. But what we need is eventually is to highlight these success stories, have these billion-dollar companies, and actually it's then people, the money will follow afterwards.
And I guess we can't solve all of those problems from within the NHS where I'm speaking, but what we do is spend a lot of time evaluating ideas and then writing letters of support or putting together MOUs. So that is a value addition to those small companies going out to look for investment, to say the NHS are willing to partner with us through the right regulatory, ethical, legal pathway to access the data, access the services, the test beds, to look at it. And that's the best thing that we can offer from a commercial value adding proposition to anyone. Come and speak to us, and then if we can see that we've got the right data and skills and expertise to support you, that sort of letter of support from the NHS I think is very valuable. And again, I think people don't understand that they can come and speak to us about that really early on and help them secure that investment to be able to develop and do things.
What do you think?
Yeah, I love money.
Well, I think I think everybody agrees that everything is important, but there's a difference in emphasis. I would say here we're talking about making a bigger pie, and here we're talking about dividing the pie, rationally and fairly. And so I'm actually very curious, very quickly, Tony. So it was mentioned here that Scotland is not really seen by investors. You're coming from down south. We will allow you to be here for at least the day and still love you. What do you think? Is that true?
It's true from what I've heard so far. Sounds like you have a lot under your bonnet and you're not showing it to people. The thing that I'm getting here is that you are not actively putting yourselves out there, okay? B, you have to put yourselves out there with a collective rather than individuals.
Yeah.
So I think the problem is that the two dispersed. You need to say, this is Scotland, come here. And we should be looking at you from the south, north, let alone from abroad. So I think it's a selling thing.
Yeah, and I guess from within the NHS, we're traditionally poor at selling because we think that we're here to provide a service and support academics rather than go out and sell ourselves.
I'm American. I love selling.
We need a leaflet.
So you're being called out here.
Just in terms of, I agree with that. just been saying, and I agree, we don't sell ourselves well. What you're working on from Scottish Enterprise perspective is that creating that critical mass of scalable businesses, and it's that we sell. It's the pipeline, the critical mass of opportunities to attract people here. We're not there yet, but we're working in, again, partnership to enable that to happen. We're trying to kind of fix the system that we've currently got to make it the best system that we've got, but how do we elevate Scotland's potential from an academic research perspective to create a critical mass in certain sectors so that sector-specific investors realise that Scotland is the place to do business for health tech, med tech, biotech, whatever it might be. So from a Scottish enterprise perspective, med tech is one of the areas that we're looking at. The other area is critical technologies, quantum photonics, etc., because it's where the natural research capability is. So it's about kind of following that research funding all the way through to commercial success. So completely agree we're not there yet, but watch this space. We have a 5-year plan.
Thanks, guys. So let's get off of this now. This, I think, is really interesting that this comes in because, Tony, I think you make a key point, which is we actually really genuinely have quite an impressive package. I didn't know what to expect when I came here, but I've never seen a wider group work as seamlessly together, doing things that make a lot of sense and are very innovative. And it is astonishing how little that is known outside of this world. And it's, I think it's good to have somebody like yourself walk in the door and say, and see it de novo, because we're sort of fish in our own water and don't really appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons the Living Lab was built, was for this exact thing. So I really appreciate you being open and discussing these things in the panel here, because I think we've probably gotten to a key point, which is we do have some impressive advantages. We're just not very good at going and making investors and other entities understand this, and that's to our detriment. And then we always end up scrambling to get the little bits and bobs that come our way. Derek, I just wanted to build on something you had said before, which is, sadly, it sounds like you guys are going to begin to shift your focus from here to Boston. Okay, shift and physically shift it.
Yeah.
So is there a single package for a company to that makes sense both here and there, or did you just decide, okay, we're now going to completely shift our focus on how we build a company, what we aim at, and so on for there, and we're just going to skip out on the UK?
Well, we're not going to skip out.
Skip out's maybe a little harsh, but you understand what I was saying.
Well, if it was $1 billion, I might skip. But no, I mean, the commercial side of things is like, so the taking is, phase 2, so phase 3, growing out the company, so marketing, we have to have a marketing presence in the States. All of these things cost money, and all of these places have to be dedicated to that geography. But there's the R&D part of it. So we're building a pipeline. We've got a pipeline. We'll stay in Glasgow, particularly with this collaboration with the University of Glasgow. So we are a small organisation, but we have access to literally hundreds of millions of pounds worth of infrastructure at the University of Glasgow. So when I'm speaking to investors, as I'm Causeway. So when I'm actually talking to the university, I'm a sort of lecturer there, and so we've still got a presence within the lab there, and so we can do things for pretty much no money. I mean, literally a conversation. We wanted to a ton of data. We wanted to use machine learning in order to actually interrogate that data, in order to be able to predict certain signatures and the oligonucleotides that we make. And I literally walked across the road and spoke to the machine learning AI guys, and I says, "Yeah, we can do that. So it'll cost us $3,000 for if you want to do it for Causeway," and that's how much. £3,000 for them to actually develop a platform, take in our technology, and give us something. It was what kind of interface do you want at the front of it? Do you want it to be fancy? And I was like, for £3,000. So maybe the university should look at how much they charge people, but it's that's from my perspective, there's incredible value remaining here from an R&D. For commercial side, no, I have to go to the States because that's where the market is.
No, I think actually that's a really important point you raised there. R&D environments in the US at the moment are uncertain. because of funding. And I've had quite a few big companies tell us that, they're really worried. I'm talking about 10-year R&D, right? So long term, about the future of that kind of work in the US. So actually the UK does provide a very stable, very well respected home for that kind of activity. But again, that's R&D, not the commercial side. So perhaps one of the things we have to do is really focus on that strength.
Yeah, there really is a strength. That's the point.
Yeah, it's worth noting, those of you who don't pay attention to this right now, including in the US, if you're not AI, the funding is brutal. Not bad, brutal. Probably the worst I've seen since I've started paying attention, which has been a little while. What do you guys think?
Well, Ruth and I, with Matthew Walters, had the pleasure of taking the new principal on a tour around the sort of shared spaces on this campus. And actually, when you take a step back from all of the projects and the individual issues, it's pretty amazing what we can offer here as a sort of collaborative space between University of Glasgow and the NHS. It was actually amazing. We spent about 3 hours. We could cover clinical research, imaging facilities, our SMEs and clinical innovation zone, the teaching that we offer here, the access to data and biorepository samples. I mean, I went home that day and thought, wow, I had actually forgotten how amazing it is. And to your point, we probably don't articulate that as well because we get caught up in the busyness of each individual thing or maybe a program of work. But we actually should all take a step back and we should be better at showcasing the collaborative because that's really unique north of the border, I think.
So we're going to run into final comments and then final comments, and then we'll wrap up.
So I think I agree with kind of on the financial side of things. Yes, I totally agree. I think there's so many of my clients that I work with really get up to clinical evaluation, clinical investigation, and then they say, okay, that's us. And the bank is closed and we can't do anything, we're going to sell this idea. I think Pari was a really good point of maybe that's a strength that we should be focusing on instead of looking at it as a detractor. From a regulatory perspective, I would say that if you're a startup or you're looking at things at the moment, I would say you're very strong. You have a very strong base in the UK for right now, especially if it's an AI device. If you're going to the US, yes, as well, also that's a very good place to do that. The EU, I'd probably say maybe pause that for now just to see what happens, and there's the targeted evaluation for the EU NDR will be released on the 16th of December this year, so we will know what the future of the legislation looks like in the EU, which will very heavily dictate what's going on here as well, I believe. So just say keep an eye on what's going out in the next few months. It's going to be some massive changes, so I wouldn't make any hasty decisions before you open your Christmas presents.
Yes. What do you think, Katriona?
I think it's a really exciting space and I would just encourage conversations. Don't make assumptions, come and speak to people about what the opportunities are, because actually we in the NHS are much more open to innovation than you may think. In terms of developing ideas, informing ideas, evidence generation, or then I do believe things are changing from an implementation perspective too.
And ironically, one of the things my friends most worry about in the States when they start these little companies is healthcare. So if their company goes belly up and they break their leg, they're kind of screwed. What do you think?
About the healthcare?
Well, no. Yeah, about breaking legs. No. What I think is, what is the comment you want to leave us with in terms of, you've been on both sides of this.
Yeah, I have. And one of the things that's very clear is that we're really rubbish talking about wanting money and actually, generate building companies that are going to be worth a lot of money. Money is the thing that drives us. We're not really, most people are not mission driven. They're basically, I want to build a company and that company is going to be worth X and that's going to have value for me and everyone else. But I don't know if it's a Scottish thing, if it's just a British thing, it's just we're rubbish at talking about money. I think let's be better at talking about billion-dollar companies. Let's be talking about, I want to be rich and I want the people that work with me to be rich. Because that's what drives a lot of people. We're not just mission driven and all the rest of it. Yes, you have to be that. But ultimately, you still need to actually talk about money.
This is one of the biggest cultural differences between the two. I find my colleagues here are very uncomfortable about talking about money.
Well, I think I completely mirror that. I mean, there's two things I would like to leave it to this room. First of all, sell. I hate that, being British. But it's a natural thing for the American psyche, isn't it? People expect to be sold at, whereas here we feel a bit like, oh, I'm not really trying to sell something. No, be bold. We need to sell. That's how it works. And the second thing I'd like to say is the simplicity is very attractive. We all know that. The reason why we use Amazon is because it's so easy for us just to press 5 letters in and say book, find a book. Everything's in one place, but Scotland actually offers that. Everything is in one place. Everything's easy to understand. Everything flows. You could be a one-stop shop. So it's a fantastic message to bring out. The fact that you're not huge means that you have that connectivity. And I wonder, going back to that message, is how we sell that message more effectively than we do today.
Sure. And I think Cambridge is a good example of this. It's a small community. We were just talking about this, and they make that work.
I'm based in Cambridge, so I see those messages all the time.
So we're a little over time, so I'm going to pull the plug on this. We have coffee and posters. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.